What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about guitar picks, and I figure since we've been talking a lot about strings in the last couple of videos, this would be the next logical step to take. Having the right pick really connects you to your instrument in a similar way that having the right strings do. Ideally, you don't want to be thinking about your guitar pick while you're playing. You don't want it sliding around, you don't want it to feel uncomfortable. You really just want to be in the zone while you're recording, or while you're playing live, or whatever it is you're doing. Before we can talk about what the right pick can do for your playing, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey with guitar picks, and then we'll dive into explaining the different attributes of different types of picks. So just like most other guitar players, my journey with guitar picks started when I first started playing guitar. I got one of those starter packs from Guitar Center. It came with like a guitar, a Spider 4 combo amp. So at first I was just using the regular, let me see. I was just using like the Fender picks that everybody uses when they start with. But shortly after I first started playing guitar, I had a buddy named Trevor, and I still have a buddy named Trevor. He was really into a lot of the virtuosos, so like Steve Vai, Jason Richardson, a lot of those guys. So he kind of got me into using Jazz 3 picks. After spending some time with the Jazz 3 picks, I kind of realized I didn't like how small they were, and I went to, I think it was the Summer Slaughter tour with Periphery, and I got a pack of strings signed by Misha and a couple of his guitar picks from the show, and they were .77 slightly sized up Jazz 3s. For a while I thought that those were awesome. I liked them better than the floppy like standard picks that you get for like an acoustic guitar. And then I got turned on to Windspear picks. Windspear picks are what I use most often, and I'll pop a picture up here. My camera's not that great, so I don't want to zoom in on little guitar picks. Windspear is awesome. I've been using them for at least 5 years now. They have tons of different materials to choose from, tons of different shapes, and we're going to dive into that more here in just a second. But for the most part, that's what I use now. I do occasionally still go back to traditional picks, especially when playing bass. I like it when they have a little bit of flop, a little bit of give to them on the bass guitar. But on regular guitar, usually I like using a stiff pick. Like we just said a second ago, everybody starts with a traditional pick. And for metal guitar playing, that's not exactly conducive to precision and tightness. I do have this little shot glass from the band The Omniscient. They were kind enough to give this to me several years ago when we were playing local shows with them. But I keep an assortment of different guitar picks in here, just in case anybody comes in and wants to record some DI guitars and stuff. I've got a ton of picks from Windspear, tons of different materials, different thicknesses. I've got a handful, and by a handful I mean boxes, of custom-made picks. I worked with a guy here local to me a couple of years ago to make some custom picks. They turned out pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. We found a really nice material to make them out of. It's got a nice bevel to it. It almost feels like sandpaper, so it's really grippy. But like I've said in a past video, I really try to provide new information, or at least interesting information. I don't like to cover the same stuff that everybody's covered a million times over. And I just felt like I was essentially ripping off Windspear picks when we made these, because it has a lot of the same qualities that his picks do. So they just sit here on my desk. I use them occasionally. I also have a small collection of picks. Again, I'll pop it up here on the screen. These are all just things that I only have one of, and I think for a lot of people that like to collect guitar picks, you kind of have these odds and ends guitar picks that you love that you don't really want to play because you don't want to wear them out. I've got like a Darth Vader pick, a bunch of cool limited edition colors and materials from Windspear, and I've got my handful of picks that I use every day. Basically a couple of Windspear picks, a couple of flat picks for bass, and then a custom TSM pick that was for my band. Before I made the custom ones, I had some engraved by Windspear because he's a cool guy. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the physics of picking, understanding how the pick and the string react together. It's kind of an equation all its own, and the better understanding you have of that, the more you can understand how the right pick can affect your playing. So basically one of two things can happen. Either the pick is going to bend when you apply pressure to the string, and the pick will kind of bend around the string, or the pick will be stiff and it will flex the string around the pick. Both of those situations have pros and cons. If the pick flexes, which is usually what happens if you have anything under like a .80, you kind of get like a snappy effect because the pick flexes to a point and then snaps back stiff, and that snappy effect is what I think a lot of people go for when they're playing guitar, especially metal guitar. This is kind of the situation that I like on bass guitar, using a thin pick but having tight strings. If the pick is flexing, if you have a lighter pick, it's going to compress your pick attack a little bit because you'll only be able to pick so hard because the pick is flexible, right? So you'll reach a certain amount of pressure where the string will go past the pick. This basically results in more consistent volume, and it gives you that snappy character. Now, if the string flexes, because you're using a thick pick, you're going to get a boosted fundamental. Especially if you pick hard, it's going to really bring out the low end kind of thud to whatever note you're picking. It'll also lead to more string noise though, especially again when you pick hard. It's going to make the string oscillate more wildly because your pick isn't flexible and therefore isn't compressing in any way, right? So you're pushing the string out of the way, and that can cause it to vibrate off the frets. You need to have more control over your pick hand if you're going to use a stiff pick. Different shapes, different materials, different thicknesses, all of these characteristics have an effect on how the string vibrates. Real quick, guys, I just want to thank you again for your time. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, or comment if there's anything that you found really interesting. If there's anything you want me to talk more about, please just let me know. The main reason why I've been making these videos is because I'm an audio engineer. I don't necessarily care about the likes and the views. I care more that this information gets into the eyes and ears of people who are in bands and people who would eventually need a mix engineer. So if you find any of this stuff interesting, if it's helping you, and if you think it could help somebody else, you could really help me out by sharing this content, by sharing my Instagram and Facebook reels, my TikTok videos. Ultimately, I know that this space is really saturated. There are tons of audio engineers that are kind of trying to do the same thing that I'm doing, and have been doing it for far longer. So my aim is to provide you with information that's useful, that hasn't been talked about 1,000 times already. So if there's anything that comes to mind that you'd like to hear me talk about, just let me know. So let's move on to attributes of picks, because that's really what's going to help you understand how to find the right pick for your playstyle. So firstly is shape. You've got teardrop shaped picks, which are kind of the just traditional shape, triangular shaped. You've got more rounded shapes. You've got multi-sided guitar picks. Basically, the thing you want to pay attention to is the shape of the edge of the pick, where the string is actually making contact with the pick. Depending on if it's rounded or if it's curved or if it has a bevel on the edge, those things all affect how the string grazes against the pick and can give you different feels. So ideally you want something that's kind of smooth. You want something that's beveled to a point. You don't want a flat, hard edge on the side of the pick. These things are all going to smooth out your playing. It's going to give you less resistance. Really, you just want where the pad of your thumb and finger go. You want that part to be kind of sticky, rough, something that gets into the grooves of your thumbprint, but you want the edge and the actual playing surface to be smooth. Next, we've got thickness. Obviously, the regular picks, most people play anything between like a .50 and a .80, let's say. I really encourage people, if you're playing metal, to move more towards like a .70, .80, .90, get some of the flexibility out of the pick. Because the stiffer it is, the more precise you can be, the easier it is to be on the tip of the pick, and have less string resistance, which will really smooth out the motions of picking on guitar. Another thing worth noting is that thicker picks, like anything that's over 2 or 3 millimeters, those types of picks tend to be good for ergonomics. When you hold a thin pick, you kind of have this pinch that you're doing, this pinching motion. And because there's not really any material, it's so thin, we tend to strain a little bit, right? And if you have a thicker pick, it opens your hand up, right? More like this, keeps you from having that tense grip if you experience any kind of pain while you're playing guitar, having something that's really thick, something more like this, or even bigger, is going to be great for playing discomfort, pain. And I used to have a lot of pain when playing because I kind of have the hitchhiker thumb thing going on. And when you strain a lot and you apply a lot of force from playing for hours or playing a lot of shows, it can start to get painful, especially this area of the thumb. And I found that using something over 2 or 3 millimeters thick, especially like during live performances, where I have a lot of anxiety, I tend to grip my pick a lot harder in person when I'm in front of people than when I'm at home by myself. Having a thicker pick really did reduce a lot of the strain and pain from picking. And the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to thickness is that, we're talking about a metal context here, and precision is everything. If you have a really thin pick and it's floppy, there's a bit of a delay when you go to pick. The actual note happens a little bit later than you think it does. And especially when you're recording and you're trying to be really precise, it can actually make your playing seem later than it is. Having a thick pick means that when the pick makes contact with the string, you instantly get a note, instead of waiting for that flex and snapping release of the pick. Next, we'll talk about materials, and I've got a handful of different picks here. I've got this bone pick from Windspear. We've got various different types of epoxy picks. You can get stone picks, wood picks, plastic picks, nylon, and all of these materials will have a slightly different sound when they make contact with the string. But I think even more important than that is how it feels to grip. Anything like plastic, nylon, various types of composites, when they get warm from being in your hand, it makes them kind of sticky. And that's really what you want, right? If the surface of the pick isn't sandpapery and it doesn't actually grab the skin on your finger, then it needs to somehow adhere to your skin so it's not sliding around in circles when you're playing. That's why I like Windspear picks so much, because they use a lot of composite materials, especially their Amber series picks. They warm up really quickly in your hand, and after you get halfway through a song, it's like stuck to your skin. Another pick that I keep in my collection is this graphite pick from Windspear. Graphite picks, I think, sound awesome. The reason I keep it in my collection, though, is because it wears out really fast, and it's kind of a reminder to myself to never buy graphite picks anymore. They shave off like pencil lead, and it gets all over your hands and all over your guitar, and it gets in your strings and makes them sound dull really quickly. Durability is an important factor, especially when you're spending more than a couple bucks on a pick. You want them to last a long time. You kind of want to avoid the picks that shave down or wear out really fast. So this graphite pick is a good example of that, and I tend to stay away from them because when I spend good money on a pick, I want it to last a long time, and the tip on this wore out after just a couple of hours of playing. I know I just kind of grazed over it, but price is also an important factor. There is something in mind about paying for something that's cheap and losing it all the time, right? There's that massive joke for guitar and bass players that we lose our picks all the time. Well, if you spend $4 or $5 on a pick, you're going to remember where you set it down. Granted, there's an upper limit to what I think each individual is willing to pay for a guitar pick. There was a time, I think, when people were really going crazy for thick picks. Hufschmid was making a ton of those really thick picks that were like almost the size of your hand, I feel like. We've seen a lot of parody videos over the last couple of years for picks that are like 30, 40, 50 bucks. I think the most I ever spent on a pick was this guy. This big epoxy kind of lava looking guitar pick, and I really found that I don't like it. My sweet spot is somewhere between like a 0.7 and like a 1.2 millimeter most of the time, although for whatever reason Windspear picks, shout out again, I usually get them in like the 1 to 3 millimeter range, but even their 3 millimeter picks feel smaller than they are for some reason. They're just really comfortable. Another factor that we kind of touched on briefly is stability. Does the pick stay in your hand? This kind of ties in with material. If you have some picks that are grippy, I think you can kind of tell by looking at it. It kind of looks like sandpaper. It's got a very grippy outside surface. But then you've also got things like Windspear picks, these composite materials that warm up in your hand, and they get pretty sticky. There are also companies like Swiss Picks and Dava Picks that use like rubber or that put holes in their picks to make them stay in your hand. Another thing is availability, right? With like wind spear picks in particular, he has various times throughout the year that he drops different picks, and there's only so much stock. And so if it gets sold out before I can get to it, I may have to go a couple months before I can buy that pick again. Wind spear picks tend to last forever. I've got some on my desk that I've had for years that haven't worn down at all. They're like brand new. You also have to figure in shipping. If you're like a touring musician and you're going to be in different cities all the time, you probably want to use a guitar pick that you can buy at most stores, because if you lose the thing that you're used to using, you need to be able to get another one so that you feel comfortable on stage. And then lastly, we're just going to talk about some odd picks, right? There's thumb picks. So there have been lots of guitar players over the years, people like Jimmy Page, who have been known to use like coins. There's also one other interesting pick that I want to touch on, and there are plenty of videos on YouTube about this stylus pick. I'll put a link up so you can read more about them. But essentially, it's got a cone-shaped tip on it, which means that the actual playing surface area is really, really small. And so if you're not insanely accurate when using this pick, it'll get caught on the strings, and it's super annoying. Especially for me, being a rhythm guitar player, I hated using this thing. I tried to train myself with it for a couple of weeks, and I know guys like Charles Caswell is big on these. I think these were like a Berklee thing. A lot of people who went to Berklee use these picks to hone their skills, and if you can stick with it, it really will refine your playing. Being a rhythm guitar player, I like to use the entire edge of the pick, and I like to really scrape the grooves of the string when I like chug and stuff. I just found the pick aggravating, personally. So now that I've talked a ton, I'm going to give you guys a couple of sound clips of thin versus thick picks, because I think that's where the most difference can be heard. Thin picks, especially the ones that are like made of nylon, the more traditional style picks, they do have a sound to them, and I think that's why I find myself going back to them every once in a while. Especially when I'm trying to do like Meshuggah covers and stuff. It's because these guys are using traditional picks, and it's part of the reason why they sound the way they sound. If you were to like put a thick plectrum in the hands of Frederick from Meshuggah, it probably would make his guitar playing sound a little bit more different. Thick picks, especially like really hard ones made of like hard materials like stone or hard plastic, they tend to kind of squeak when you touch the string with them, especially plain strings. You get this really like trebly, squeaky sound when it touches the strings. That's pretty undesirable for most people. But again, like Charles Caswell and a lot of those guys who are doing a lot of the like pick scrapey type riffs, they make really good use of that sound in a musical way. But yeah, enough of my talking. Here's a couple of examples. final thoughts. I don't just use one guitar pick all the time, right? I like to use different guitar picks for different situations, especially being more of a studio musician myself, doing a lot of production in other people's songs and mix engineering. Using different picks for your left and right guitars can be one more quality that makes your guitars sound wider, right? When we're talking about double tracking rhythm guitars, wideness is usually what we're going for. And to get a wide effect, you need some slight differences between the left and right channel. And so using like a slightly floppy pick for the left take and then a really hard pick for the right take, we'll get some slight variations in how that string vibrates and how the part sounds. Not so different that I think you would love or hate one or the other, but enough that it could make your stereo guitars sound a little bit more stereo. Another thing to think about is switching picks for different sections of a song, especially if you want that like dragging chug kind of vibe like Suicide Silence used to do. Having a thin pick is really good for that because of that delay that we talked about before, where the chug is kind of a little bit after the kick. It kind of gives you that lazy, sluggish kind of chug. Maybe you want to use a floppier pick for your breakdown sections. And then for your choruses and your verses, you could use a thicker pick that's really precise and right on time. Maybe you want to use a thick pick for your leads and a thin one for your rhythm tracks. These are all things that can help differentiate your guitar tracks and make them easier to mix together because they sound slightly different. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is that experimenting with different picks, just like experimenting with different strings, can lead you to different types of playing. It can inspire you to try something different, or to learn something new, or to uncover some different riffs that you never would have before. So I think most important is that you at least spend some time experimenting with different picks. You may not find something that you like more, but it may inspire you to play your guitar in a way that you wouldn't. So thanks again So thanks again, guys, for watching this video. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you learned something new. Until next time.